Dennis Anderson along with Julie Zenner, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
A sharp rise in vaping among students has put local officials on high alert. We'll talk with St. Louis County public health officials about this growing problem.
A very special event next week will bring 5 medals of honor to Duluth. We will talk about the men who are being honored at a seminar and dinner at Veterans Memorial Hall.
And we'll have the week's top business stories from the editors at Business North.
Stay where you are. Almanac North is next. Hello once again and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. And Julie, a lot of folks are at their hunting shacks tonight on the eve of the Minnesota deer hunting opener.
Well, I hope they're staying warm tonight because it has the potential to be pretty cold out in the stands tomorrow.
I have a feeling people are bringing some heavy clothing.
I think so.
Yeah. Anyway, well, we've got some great guests tonight, interesting topics. Might as well start.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denny, and welcome everyone. The use of e-cigarettes or vaping is on the rise, especially among students. The 2019 Minnesota Student Survey shows the rate of use in 8th graders doubling and more than a quarter of 11th graders vaping at least once in the past month. Local officials are working to educate the public about the health risks of vaping, including here in St. Louis County. Joining us with more is Josh Gorham, St. Louis County Public Health Program Coordinator, and Dr. Jesse Conan is St. Louis County's Public Health Medical Consultant. And thanks to both of you for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. Now, Josh, a lot of people started vaping because they thought that it was a safer alternative to smoking. Is that what the research is showing now that it's been around for a while?
Well, you know, vaping, what you inhale when you vape can oftentimes include nicotine, and nicotine has a long history of being harmful to our bodies, and it's really not any different than what you inhale when you smoke a traditional cigarette. So I think we're seeing that there are the possible effects would be very similar to what it would be to smoking a cigarette, and I'm sure Dr. Cunnin here can speak more to that as well.
So, Doctor, what makes vaping then a top priority here in St. Louis County and across the Northland?
Yeah, and something about vaping that I think a lot of people don't understand is that vaping typically involves nicotine, and nicotine is inherently a very addictive substance, particularly to youth. So not only might people be getting addicted to vaping, but it seems that individuals who start vaping, even if they've never used regular cigarettes before, seem to be more likely to start using regular cigarettes. So there's concern about dangers associated with vaping in and of itself, as well as potentially a progression to use of
there have been
cigarettes.
deaths, 2 of them right here locally. Have most of the people who have suffered death did they buy something else they put into the cigarette to vape? Is there more there than traditional nicotine?
Right, and that's a good question too. And you know, the truth is that we're still learning. Just in the last 4 or 5 months, we've started to learn about this condition, which has been coined vaping-associated lung injury. And we're not exactly certain what is causing it. It seems like nationwide there has been 1,500 or more cases thus far, including a couple of cases in St. Louis County. And it ends up being a very severe illness where individuals end up needing intensive care. And we have not identified what the actual causative agent is. It is interesting that in 80% of the cases, the individuals have claimed to vape THC products. But like I said, we still have a lot yet to learn, and we're still trying to figure out what that particular causative agent is.
Josh, as the County Public Health Coordinator, this survey of students has to be pretty concerning to you to see how frequently people in high school are vaping and how those numbers continue to grow.
Yeah, and it's high school, but it's also middle school. Really back in 2016, we started to see for the first time the trend among youth and tobacco use beginning to rise again. So after 10 years, use rates had gone down significantly, and now that vaping has been around a little bit, we're seeing that trend reverse and go back up. So that's very concerning. And I had the opportunity to talk to a local principal today at the middle school level, and I just kind of asked her, what are you seeing in the schools? And her words were, this is an issue that impacts any and every kid. There's no unique identity. Everyone's at risk. And the take-home message from her was that kids do not understand the effects of nicotine and how addictive it is and how difficult it can be to get off. So she was really stressing that parents, adults, mentors need to be having conversations with youth.
So Josh, what then is a good time to start having those conversations with kids?
I think as early as possible. I think probably sometime around 4th or 5th grade would be a good time.
Early on?
Yeah, even before they're getting into middle school. I've had the conversations with my daughter, who's 11 years old, and she certainly understands that is something not to do. And we've heard from even 4th and 5th grade teachers and parents wanting to make sure that their kids understand the possible impacts.
Doctor, you mentioned that some of the cases where there have been deaths have been linked to using THC in the e-cigarettes. Are these modifications that people are making on their own, or do they buy cartridges from states where the THC is legal? How does that work for those of us who haven't really seen it?
Right. And to be honest, I don't think anybody has a confident answer to that question at this point. There are recommendations now which are coming nationally from the Centers for Disease Control that people avoid vaping any THC products. There's also a recommendation to avoid using any vape or vaping devices that were purchased on the street. And the recommendation that everyone consider not vaping at all, because clearly there is some risk for harm. And avoidance would be the best way to approach that.
Do you think that this is being amplified at all by the fact that there have been states legalizing recreational marijuana, so kids don't think that marijuana or THC is as harmful as maybe they once did? And either of you could speak to that.
In my mind, I haven't drawn that connection. I think that the base of the issue is that people don't understand the risks associated with vaping in general.
Yeah.
And that includes the youth, it includes adults, and really the education is still getting into the culture of health professionals as they grasp the issue as well.
Josh, other than in pictures, I've never seen an e-cigarette. How is it built? What's in it?
I honestly couldn't tell you how they're built, but I know that they're built and designed to be relatively discreet. There have been some models that I've seen that kind of look like flash drives you might plug into a computer. I've seen people walking around with devices that look like pens. Really, they come in all different kinds of shapes and sizes. We do have a resource out there for adults, educators, mentors who might want to learn more. It's on bridginghealthnorth.org under resources, vaping resources. You can look that up. There's a lot of great information there. But yeah, they're really discreet, and that's why they're a really big problem. And just a point too with risk and decreased perception of risk, perhaps related to legalization. It's hard to say definitely, but what we're seeing when we do student survey data is we also look at students' perception of harm from using these devices. And usually when perception of risk is low, there's more use. Yeah. If we can increase that perception, or that show students that there's this reality of risk associated with vaping, it does have impact on use rates.
And I saw in the survey that 76% of 11th graders say that they thought there was no slight or just moderate risk associated with it. So that message is not getting out there, or is not taking hold in the students' minds, it sounds like.
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do educating our community on the risks associated with this, and it can be a bit of a challenge because e-cigarettes are relatively new.
Yeah.
We don't always have an exact answer of what your life's going to be like in 20, 30 years after using it. We have that answer for cigarettes, but I think we can feel fairly confident that if we're seeing serious lung injuries, if nicotine's involved, it's probably not a risk worth taking.
Mm-hmm.
Are schools locally here strongly embracing education to warn students about this?
Absolutely. Across St. Louis County, public health educators have been in classrooms, at community events, presenting as much information as possible. And in fact, one of our partners in health here in St. Louis County, Essentia Health, has recently released a campaign, a toolkit called Don't Blow It. It's made for educators in the classroom to help get that message out more. Yeah, a lot of effort's been put into that.
Doctor, are there specific things that nicotine does to the teen brain that makes it particularly dangerous for young people to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mentioned addiction in and of itself already. The brain is susceptible to latching on to that drug and continuing to need it. But it's also harmful to the development of the brain, in particular in the youth years and even up into your mid-20s. The brain is still developing, and nicotine seems to get in the way to that and could predispose to mental health or intellectual issues.
So the younger the smoker, the more trouble later on.
Absolutely the truth, yeah.
And greater risk for addiction too, I might add.
There have been some local laws restricting the age and sale of vaping products and flavored tobaccos. Do you feel like that's having a positive impact at all?
It's really early to tell. There still needs to be an evaluation process in local communities that have adopted this, such as Hermantown and Duluth. There is a longer track record in California, and early indications is that it does reduce ability to buy and purchase. So far so good, but
Sure.
how you implement a policy matters too, so there's more to it that way as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in and talking about this really important topic. Good luck as you go out there and educate people.
Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
both.
Great, thank you.
They're often called America's greatest heroes. They receive their honor for gallantry above and beyond the call of duty, risking their life to preserve the lives of fellow soldiers. Well, next week, all 5 of Duluth's Medal of Honor recipients will be remembered at a seminar and dinner at Veterans Memorial Hall at the Duluth Depot. And for the first time, all 5 Medals of Honor will be on display. Here to tell us more is Mike Stainbrook, the Master of Ceremonies for next week's dinner. Mike is a former Marine and a retired Delta Airlines captain. And Court Story is the nephew of Medal of Honor recipient Major Henry Courtney Jr. and helped return his medal to Duluth early this year. Gentlemen, great to have both of you here. Maybe, Mike, you could tell us a little bit about what's coming up a week from today, next Friday.
Well, on November 15th, down at the depot, the evening event will be a Veterans Remembrance Dinner. We'll have the 5 Medals of Honor on display. The families of our 5 area recipients will be in attendance, and they've agreed to bring their
The medals?
medals.
Yeah.
And earlier in the day at 2 o'clock at the Playhouse, there's going to be a leadership seminar hosted by General Neal, former 4-star general in the Marine Corps. He was also General Schwarzkopf's spokesman during the first Gulf War. It's going to be co-hosted with a local historian. Well, actually, he's a Twin Cities historian and attorney, Alan Anderson, who has written a book on our 5 recipients. Actually, we've included Richard Bong in the book. Richard Bong was born in Superior,
right.
but we're including him in the book and in our
Wonderful.
in our discussions. So those who attend the seminar will receive a book. The evening event, those attendees will receive the book written by Alan Anderson. Plus, we're going to unveil a print, a limited edition print that was painted by local artist Tim Cortez. And those are going to be for sale. In fact, I see it on the screen there. It's a beautiful print. Dinner will be served. General Neal will be the keynote speaker that evening as well. We're going to award the Mike Calillo Scholarship and also unveil the print. So it's going to be a very full day.
Court, you were instrumental in getting your uncle's medal back to Duluth. He was a Duluth native.
That's right.
Tell the story of Henry Courtney and how he earned that Medal of Honor, or
It'll be
why
hard
he
to do
received it.
briefly, but he was a Marine that born and raised in Duluth, went to school at the University of Minnesota, went to law school down at Loyola in Chicago, entered the Marine Corps, was first talked to him in 1939, entered in 1940, spent his 5 years in the Marine Corps and was in the Pacific twice, and was sent home with malaria to recover, was offered a training billet, and requested to go back, volunteered to go back to the front because he was older. When he was killed in action, in the action for which he was awarded the Medal of Honor, he was 29 years old. So he was 10 or 12 years older than a lot of the troops that he commanded, and he referred to them as his boys. And he loved them and he wanted to be there. And there's a lot written about that in letters that he wrote to the family and that others wrote about him, of his love and wanting to get these kids back home. So that's as brief as I can make it, and I could go into the battle, but I don't know if we have time for that, but it was quite a campaign.
Why was it important to you to bring that medal back to Duluth?
Well, Duluth is his hometown. He was born here, raised here, educated here. The family was part of the community for a half a century. His father and his father's brother were attorneys here and practiced together. Henry passed a law exam. He was going to be in the law firm when he got out of the Marine Corps after the war. That never happened. And this is, of course, his sister was my mother and born and raised here. And it was given by another sister to a place in Pennsylvania. And when things began happening in Duluth down at the Union Hall to make a place for the medal, I and others, including Mike and other veterans up here and our family, felt this medal should be in Minnesota. This is his hometown.
This is a big deal for Duluth.
Yeah.
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 And people will have an opportunity to see these. Where will they be on display for?
Well, they'll be right down there, and Henry's medal will be there indefinitely. It's on a long-term loan.
It's in the depot, right?
In the depot, along with one other, I think it's Oscar Nelson's medal. They're permanently there, well, permanently, but on loans, at least Henry's is. The other 3 are being brought in by their families, and they'll only be there that one day.
Right, yeah.
And they'll all be on display there. And I'm not sure exactly where.
Mike, briefly, what's the history of the Medal of Honor? How far back does it go, do you know?
Well, it goes back to the Civil War.
It does.
And at the time, they were not awarded for valor. In fact, there's a woman who received the Medal of Honor. She was an Army, working for the Army as a surgeon. And so there's one woman who received the Medal of Honor. Around 1917, there was a decision made that the Medal of Honor would only be given for acts of valor against an armed enemy. For instance, Oscar Nelson's Medal of Honor, interesting thing about Oscar Nelson, his was a peacetime Medal of Honor. He was aboard the USS Bennington out in San Diego Harbor. There was a boiler explosion. In 1905 is when he was awarded that. he came back to Duluth and served with the Army Corps of Engineers
Interesting.
in Duluth for 24 years.
Yeah.
That's the Oscar Nelson connection to Duluth. But his medal is a peacetime Medal of Honor. His was awarded in 1905. But
So
after
it goes
that,
back a ways, doesn't
yes.
it? Yeah.
And then after World War, or during World War I is when it was only given for acts of valor against an armed
Sure.
enemy.
As a former military man yourself, what does it mean to you to be bringing these medals and to have these stories told and these folks memorialized?
Well, first, Veterans Memorial Hall feels it important to tell not only the stories of Medal of Honor recipients, but of all veterans. And it's available for any veteran. You can go online to the St. Louis County Historical Society website, the Veterans Memorial Hall link, and you can fill out your history there, or you can ask for an oral history. A volunteer will come and record your oral history, and it'll be put in the archives down there. So it's important to tell all veteran stories, not just Medal of Honor recipients. However, so many of the stories revolving around our Medal of Honor recipients are just so incredible. And you know, the selflessness, and it's just almost beyond comprehension. I think that's what tugs at your heartstrings.
Court, there seems to be an uptick in how Americans now are honoring and just giving honor to veterans today. Why do you think that is?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I would have seen it that way. I wish there was more. You know, we all get worked up about sports heroes, and you know, that's just the way it is. And I think these things are forgotten, and they shouldn't be. If I could add another point, I think this book that Alan Anderson has written that's going to be distributed is a godsend, because part of what happened here is that in the pursuit of Henry Courtney, my uncle's medal, the group came together, and we were finally successful, and the medal came back. It was very clear to us that the stories of these other four were not told very well or very thoroughly. And so Alan Anderson has deeply researched these people and where they were born, where they were raised, how they got in the service, what they did. And this is not some little pamphlet. This is a good book. There's a history of the Medal of Honor in there.
We're running out of time. Can you tell us again Friday night when and where?
Friday night, the afternoon sessions at 2 o'clock in the Union Depot and the theater portion.
Playhouse.
And then the remembrance dinners in the Grand Hall or Great Hall of the Union Depot.
Again, I can't stress
and
this is a big event.
Everyone who attends the seminar gets a copy of the book.
Yep.
And the dinner.
And are there still opportunities for people to sign up?
Yes, there's a waiting list for the dinner. However, there's plenty of seats for the seminar at the Playhouse.
Okay, Mike, Court, thank you both very much.
Thanks
Thanks
for having us.
Time now for the business news from our friends at Business North. Minnesota Power is asking state regulators to increase its annual operating revenue by nearly $66 million by raising electric rates. The investor-owned utility said its request reflects changes in customer demand, increasing operating expenses, and higher regulatory costs. The company's last rate case was filed in 2016. If approved, Minnesota Power could raise rates for the average residential customer by more than $11, bringing the average homeowner's monthly bill to near $90. The average increase for a small business customer would be $30 a month.
Como Lube and Supplies has agreed to pay a civil penalty of $50,000 to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for violations related to operating and maintaining storage tanks at its Duluth facility. The MPCA found that the company had many tanks with excessive corrosion and did not have an adequate corrosion protection system on 4 of its tanks. They also found 17 tanks didn't have the required overfill prevention system. An inspection also found tanks were removed from service and Como failed to sample for contamination underneath the tank as required.
Edina Realty, the largest residential real estate company in Minnesota and western Wisconsin, is expanding into Virginia and the city's surrounding market. The new office will replace a former Coldwell Banker location. Edina's expansion comes when real estate is doing well. The median home sales price in the area is $160,000. On average, homes are on the market 80 days before selling, and there were 594 new listings in September. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Well, you can keep up with our latest topics by following Almanac North on our social media channels. You will find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And for updates about your favorite PBS programs, visit the WDSU website, where you can also find news about the station and learn about our upcoming events. The big question, Julie, are you and your husband going to be out chasing the elusive white-tailed deer this weekend?
We will not, but since my husband is not hunting this year, I might send him to the grocery store.
There you go. For Julie and the crew at Almanac North, I'm Dennis Anderson. Good luck this weekend. Be safe out there. Have a good weekend, everybody. Good night and be kind.